This is the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria, session number 50. Saying 50 is kind of weird because there are times when I thought that I would never get past session 5. But it's because of all of you who are tuning in and providing me lots and lots of reinforcement for doing this show. It's kept things going. So I just want to take a minute to thank all of you who have downloaded this show, have come along the ride with me. I know I've got listeners who are early adopters of the program, who've been there since session 1, and I've got listeners who are learning about the podcast every day now. And so it's really just been a humbling experience and one that I've really, truly enjoyed. So I won't belabor the point. So as it relates to this particular episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. And today's episode, we talk all things ACT. Yes, it's another ACT-related episode that I am really excited to share with you. It's a very lengthy conversation. These episodes are kind of creeping up in their average duration, I think, but one I think that it will be well worth your time. And along the way, we mentioned a bunch of different resources, so tune in to the end, and I'll share where you can access those materials. And without further ado, let's hear the intro music.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Hey everyone, I want to welcome someone to the program who has been requested many, many times by listeners. And not too long ago, he appeared on the Why We Do What We Do podcast. And in listening to it, I was like, dang, I want to have him on the show. And I commented on the WWD's Facebook page. I said, that's the Jonathan Tarbox interview I want to do. And then you responded right back and said, wait, there's so much more to talk about. So having said all that, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. Jonathan, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be a part of this podcast. I'm a big fan. I've listened to the ones on, Pat Fryman and Greg Hanley, and you get some really great folks on here. So I want to say it's an honor and a privilege of mine to get to do it too, and I'm really excited.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, like I said, a lot of listeners have been asking for you for quite some time, and it's great to. And obviously, you've been someone I've wanted to have on the show as well, and so it's great to kind of make this connection finally and get it down. So let's get into it. So if you've listened to the show, like you said, you know that the first question right out of the gate is basically tell us a story about how you encountered behavior analysis, how you got into doing this, and trace us through to where you are right now. We're obviously going to be talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. So if you want to talk about how your interest developed in that, go right ahead.
All right. Well, it's kind of cool, actually. It all started right around the corner from you in southern Vermont, actually. I was undergrad at Marlborough College, which is a very small little liberal arts school. I think a total population of about 300 people, including students and faculty, on an old farm on top of a mountain. And I was actually studying political science and studying nonviolent, compassionate community building and nonviolent community action. So I was studying people like the Dalai Lama, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, folks like that. And basically what I was really interested in is how to make a better world, how to make a more compassionate, caring, loving community, and how to make the world a more nonviolent place. And so that was kind of my interest. And then I also had sort of a side interest in special education maybe, but I wasn't really sure. And then I saw an ad on the college job board at Marlborough College, and it was for a tutor for a kid with autism. So I thought I'd check it out, right? So I went and interviewed with the mom, and it turned out it was actually an ABA program, a home-based ABA program, and a little farmhouse in, I'm blanking on the name, but it's right by the ski resort in southern Vermont, tiny little town. And basically, there were no services at all. This was in 1997 or 98 or something. No services at all at the time. And so the mom had just cobbled together whatever ABA program she could for her kid. She took her kid out of school and hired college kids to be the ABA therapist. And she was the supervisor, right? So she bought like VHS cassette tapes for us to watch at the time, and she bought whatever books were available. And she hired a consultant named Helen Bloomer from Albany, New York, to come in and train us college kids. And I was pretty much hooked immediately. I saw the problem behavior going down, skill acquisition going up. I was graphing pencil and paper back then, and the kid was hitting, biting, kicking, screaming, punching, pinching, you name it. And yet I could see those behaviors going down, and it was really cool. And honestly, like the number one thing that hooked me more than anything was, this sounds cheesy, but true story. It was the mom's dedication and just the mom's like selfless courage that she showed up every day, scared, embarrassed, tired, hopeless, and yet she was just there. She was present. She was making it happen. She was doing whatever it took to give her kid a better life, even though the odds were stacked against her. And so I guess it was just kind of that inspiration that it showed me like, wow, I could do something that really makes a difference in a tangible way, not just something that's sort of philosophically interesting or potentially helpful in the future. Like, we can actually change a family's life for the better today and every day. And we get to collect cool data and like be nerdy scientists about it too, So I was hooked from the beginning. And then I sniffed around a little bit in my last year of college for what would be a good place to go get a job after my undergrad, and heard of the New England Center for Children, which is one of the best places in the world for skill acquisition work in ABA. Was lucky enough to get a job there and start their Master's in Applied Behavior Analysis program through Northeastern University. Mm-hmm. And I did the first year of that program, loved it, instantly got hooked and realized I wanted my PhD. At the time, the PhD wasn't an option there, so I had a job opportunity to go to the Kennedy Krieger Institute and get research experience. So I went there, learned how to do functional analysis and treatment of the worst imaginable severe problem behavior in a hospital setting. That was an incredible experience. Worked with amazing people like Willie De Leon and Trish Kurtz and Louis Agopian and Lynn Bowman. Got really great experience there, and then applied to PhD programs and got into UNR, which ended up being my first choice, and just had an incredible experience there. Worked with people like Linda Hayes, Steve Hayes, and Larry Williams, and Pat Gezzi, and Michelle Wallace, and really kind of did everything. Like we did, like I ran mice in the afternoon in the mouse lab doing interdisciplinary research, and I worked with adults with severe problem behavior and kids with feeding disorders, and then wrote philosophy papers with Linda in the afternoon. I mean, it was just a really amazingly well-rounded experience. So I got to do literally kind of everything in behavior analysis. Got a little bit of exposure to precision teaching, not much, but just did a lot and really loved it and just dug it. And I guess I would say like really fell in love with the science even more. And Linda Hayes's classes on radical behaviorism and on Skinner's verbal behavior were just sort of totally mind-blowing. And I realized, wow, like this is a comprehensive science of everything humans do. This isn't just a technology to fix a few specific problems of behavior. It's not just something we do to help folks with autism, although we have a huge contribution there to make, and that's incredible. It's much broader. And so that was that. I was hooked for life for sure.
What's interesting, Jonathan, is a consistent message. As you probably also know from listening to the show, we have perhaps an overrepresentation of UNR grads. And I keep waiting for my fruit basket from Steve Hayes, or maybe some sponsorship opportunities. I don't know. But that's the consistent, kidding aside, that's the kind of consistent message that I've gotten from speaking with folks who are part of that program or have been a part of that program, is that you kind of run the gamut of the vast opportunities that are out there in our science. So that's very cool.
And, it's funny when you think about it, it's kind of like its own form of generalization training, right? Because if you only do behavior analysis with one population in one setting, that's like very overly restricted stimulus control of your understanding of behavior analysis and your love for behavior analysis. But when you're experience the science across like a large variety of different exemplars of how the science can be applied, it I think does form a larger, broader, overarching appreciation, and just for lack of a more technical term, a love for the science and all the really rich and varied sources of positive reinforcement that can come for you as a behavior analyst from such a wide variety of opportunities. So you could tell I love it.
So did you was Linda Hayes your advisor, or who'd you study with?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So she was my main advisor, but I also worked closely with really with all the faculty, but she was my main advisor. I did my master's thesis and my PhD dissertation with Linda.
Nice. So just kind of looking through your bio, you're now at, I'm going to perhaps not get the exact titles correct, so feel
That's
free
all right.
to jump in.
You're from the East Coast. I'll forgive you. No, I'll just jump in if that's easier. I don't mind.
So you're the, you're at USC, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I was like, USC, UCL. No, it's USC, right? I got those two confused momentarily.
That's
and
right.
so looking at your bio there, it looks like you have done some work in a wide variety of areas, from feeding disorders to, lots of publications on verbal behavior. And then, kind of more recently, you've been talking a lot about acceptance and commitment therapy and have some research going on with regard to that. I know you were part of the huge ACT boot camp that recently happened in surprise, Reno, Nevada. And seeing the pictures on Facebook there, of the proceedings, I had like the worst case of FOMO, because I saw everyone there having a good time, learning lots of cool stuff. And I was like, man, I wish I could have swung that.
It was incredible, yeah. Well, hey, we're doing another ACT boot camp on the East Coast pretty soon, maybe in the fall or so. So you got to get out there, and maybe we can work in some podcast interviews or something, or some sort of live stuff, in the moment during the boot camp or something like that. That'd be cool.
I'm in. All right, cool. So let's back up a second, because if we're not careful, we'll just go running off in that direction. And that's where I want to go, of course. But I want to know how you kind of got into ACT in particular.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So so this is interesting because when I didn't really realize that UNR was one of the top quality programs when I was applying to different programs. I was 21, 22 years old or whatever, didn't really know a whole lot about the field of behavior analysis. And so I was applying here and there. And when I applied to UNR and I went out there for interview weekend, what I was really attracted to was the comprehensiveness of the opportunities, and that you could really become a well-rounded behavior analyst. And so that was the main reason why I went there. I didn't really know much about ACT or RFT or that stuff. And so then I get there and I'm studying, and ACT was really starting to take off. This was around, 2000 or so. It was really starting to take off, tons and tons of research, lots of research on RFT. The main sort of seminal ACT and RFT books were being published right around then, even though empirical research had been happening for a couple decades already. And so my first impression was, this seems like a weird coincidence that this cool stuff just happens to be happening at the university that I happened to show up at. I kind of didn't buy it at first. I kind of thought like, whatever, okay, here's the next new bandwagon, like I want to be a behavior analyst first, and then some particular kind of researcher second or third or fifth, or maybe never, right? Like I'm not a verbal behavior researcher. I'm a behavior analyst. I'm not an autism person. I'm a behavior analyst. And so the same thing I felt for ACT. I'm not an ACT or an RFT guy. I'm a behavior analyst. And so I'll adopt or I'll use those bodies of work if and when they're actually useful for achieving practical outcomes that really matter to me in behavior analysis. And so for a while, I was kind of suspect. And really, honestly, anytime there's a new sort of movement or area of research or practice, and people are really excited about it, almost too excited about it, to me, that seems suspect. That seems like sort of almost more like a cult or something, or like a bandwagon that people are jumping on. And we really need to be skeptical as scientists. We can't just jump on bandwagons.
If you're part of the marketing team for an ABA practice, it can be pretty confusing to ethically market your services. From limitations on using testimonials to challenges with using photos and videos, ethical digital marketing can be a virtual minefield. In addition to these ethical considerations, the various digital marketing channels that exist these days presents a dizzying array of options. Fortunately, I'm teaming up with two experts in an upcoming webinar to discuss how to navigate these challenges. First, Adrian Fitzer, owner of the Applied Behavior Analysis Center, and I will review the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code and discuss specific code elements that are pertinent to digital marketing. And then, Rich Brooks, founder and president of Flight New Media and nationally recognized speaker on entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and social media, joins us to answer questions such as, should I invest my time in Facebook or SEO? Should I build an email list or spend money on online advertising? Should I be blogging, podcasting, or posting video to YouTube? And how about investing in my website? Rich will demystify these challenges as well as present a framework that will help you determine the essential things to focus on as you grow your business. This webinar will be held on May 16th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and participants will receive 2 Type 2 Ethics CEUs. As a bonus, during the webinar, Rich will randomly select a few lucky participants' websites and provide some constructive criticism, tough love, or whatever else you want to call it. So for more information, go to the show notes for this particular episode, behavioralobservations.com session 50, and hit the links to learn more. I hope to see you there.
And so I was highly skeptical for a while, but I engaged the work. I read the books, I read the articles, and really for me, the number one thing that attracted me to ACT was that it helped achieve what to me was the most important goal that Skinner laid out starting in 1945, which was behavior analysis is supposed to be a comprehensive science of psychology, a comprehensive science of everything all organisms do. It's not supposed to be a science of relatively simple behaviors executed under relatively simple environmental conditions. And so, when I took radical behaviorism with Linda, and I read about, Skinner said, private events, they're part of our science too. They're going to be hard to measure, and we don't want to give them any kind of special status. They're not the cause of overt behavior. They're just more behavior to be explained, just like overt behavior, right? If you see someone say the word pizza out loud, or hear them say it out loud, that's not the cause of anything else. That's a behavior, right? And so what Skinner said, and I bought it, was, okay, what about if the person thinks pizza to themselves or, quote unquote, says it in their head or in their mind? Skinner said that's exactly the same thing. It's just more verbal behavior. It's nothing special. It should follow the exact same laws as overt behavior. And if that's true, then that means, great, we can actually include that as part of our science. If and when private events actually matter to us as humans, we should be able to address them in behavior analysis as behaviors and stimuli and nothing else, not as special causes, not as constructs, nothing like that. And so I was really excited about that when I, first learned about that in, I guess, the year 2000 or 2001. And then I started looking around our science and I said, gee, Skinner said this in 1945. We're 60 years later almost, and we're kind of not really doing it very much. And kind of maybe, if we're honest, maybe our culture that we've built up within behavior analysis, both applied and basic, is maybe kind of avoidant of dealing with private events and maybe kind of fearful of private events because they sound mentalistic. And then I asked myself, well, I wonder if it actually matters if we address private events, because there's a few behavior analysts out there that say, oh, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. We just, just ignore it, which, by the way, is more like methodological behaviorism than radical behaviorism. So I asked myself, well, is that reasonable to just ignore it? And Skinner said, no, of course not. Like, give me a break. Like, it matters what people think and it matters what people feel. Of course, it's a huge part of what we do as humans. And then I thought, well, what about as scientists? What do scientists do? And then I thought, actually, scientists sit around engaging in a whole bunch of private events. Almost all science is thinking about science, right? And then writing about science. And yes, like the overt behaviors of fingers tapping on a keyboard, that's overt behavior, right? Clearly. But it kind of matters what you think while you're typing, right? Let's just be honest, right? How about when you read a book? If you're not reading out loud, that's private behavior. I think reading kind of matters, right? Like, duh, so obvious, right? Now, how about when a parent says to you, I can't do extinction with my kid because I feel like I'm going to make him go insane. Or I can't do extinction with my kid. I'm too sad. I'm too upset. I'm too tired. What the parent is doing there is trying to talk to you about their private events. And if all we have to say is, well, just do it because the research says so, if we have nothing to say to the parent about their private events that is useful and based on behavior analysis, I think maybe we're missing something. Like there might be an important piece of what it means to be human that our science is not addressing. So looking around, I said, ACT is kind of the only game in town. It's kind of the only area of applied behavior analysis that is actually trying to address private events and deal with them.
You may know of BDS for their CBA Learning Module series, the premier exam prep and curriculum supplement for BCBA and BCABA candidates. But did you know that BDS has a variety of online continuing ed courses, including ethics CE courses? BDS is very excited to announce their brand new supervisory training course as well, developed through a partnership with esteemed authors, Doctors John Bailey and Mary Birch. If you're interested in expanding your repertoire and becoming a supervisor, visit behaviordevelopmentsolutions.com/supervision. This new supervisory training course by BDS contains fluency-building modules that include engaging videos presented by Bailey and Birch. Questions feature informational graphics, flowcharts, and examples adopted from Bailey and Birch's live supervisory training course. The supervisory training course also awards 9.5 Type 2 CE credits. So if you want to become a fantastic supervisor, visit behaviordevelopmentsolutions.com/supervision and take a new step forward in your career with supervisory training by BDS. Cool. So I know we've done a handful of shows on ACT, but I also know that people are kind of tuning into the podcast and learning about it and kind of joining us in progress. So for those who may be unfamiliar with ACT or haven't caught some of the previous episodes on this, can you take us for a quick run through, perhaps starting with what is ACT, and then talk about the processes associated therein?
Sure. And it's tough because it's a very complex area of work. And so it's hard to know kind of how much or how little detail to go into and whether to talk about it in sort of common sense terms so that people actually understand what you're talking about, or whether to go into a complex behavioral conceptual analysis of it, which sounds more behavior analytic, but honestly, people are not going to understand it very well unless they put the time into it. And so it's like this. Like if you think of something like functional communication training, we've got differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior, communication, and we've got extinction for problem behavior. And we can talk about it as a procedure, and we can talk about it in terms of the conceptual analysis, right? The extinction and the reinforcement for the different behaviors. ACT is like that, but instead of one overt problem behavior that you're putting on extinction and one overt adaptive behavior, communication, that you're placing on reinforcement with the same functional reinforcer, you've got a lot of complex behaviors, both overt and covert, and you've got 6 different areas of procedures that can be applied to it. But sort of the overarching bigger picture is the problem behaviors that we're trying to decrease are people, and by people I mean everybody who has verbal behavior, but people spending too much time wrestling with rules that aren't very effective and that mostly orient them to short-term negative reinforcement, and spend more time engaging in overt behavior oriented towards larger classes of delayed positive reinforcers. So for example, if making friends really matters to me, then but I have like social anxiety, let's say, or actually we don't even have to go there. Let's not like diseaseify it or whatever, right? Like making friends matters to me, and it's like aversive to approach people, right? Like to go up in a coffee house and say hi to someone is aversive and anxiety provoking. Okay, so you don't have to have a disorder for that, right? We can all relate to that. Then one thing that I can do, sort of one repertoire that I can do, is talk to myself a lot about how I'm going to feel. Like, well, I could go say hi to her, but I'm going to feel nervous. Or maybe I'll do it tomorrow when I feel less anxious. Or, man, I should have worn that other shirt today. I look stupid. Or my hair is messy, or I'm going bald, or whatever in my case, right? So that's one repertoire of behaviors. And you can do that a whole bunch, right? And like, how good is that at moving you towards making more friends? Not super effective, right?
Right.
So another repertoire of behaviors that's going to be a lot more effective is walking over and saying hi, right? Sending an email or a Facebook message to somebody, hitting them up on whatever social media, whatever kids do these days, right? So there's like overt behaviors that move you towards stuff you really care about. And then there's other behaviors that are more sort of avoidance oriented. ACT fundamentally is about shifting the balance and weakening these avoidance repertoires and strengthening repertoires of overt behaviors that move you towards stuff you really care about. That's fundamentally what ACT is about. And then there's 6 processes that we can talk about if you want to that help move you in that direction.
Yeah, let's run through those, and we can go through them pretty quickly. And again, if people want a deeper dive, certainly we can point them towards resources on the web, but also just off the top of my head, let's see, session 6 with DJ Moran, session 14 with Mark Dixon, I want to say Russ Harris was session 40 or 38. And there might have been more. So there are areas in which you can, get like I said, a deeper dive in it. But again, given that some people this might be their first exposure to it, we can do the Reader's Digest or the Twitter version of the processes.
Yeah, and I think I really do recommend checking out podcasts first because it's just it's a kind of a faster way to access the material that might be complex and kind of intimidating. And you can do it while you're driving around, right? So for sure, the one with DJ Moran is really helpful. And there's other ones too. There was a podcast put out by ACBS a while back. I don't think they do it anymore, but it's called the Act in Context. Right?
Yes. That's where I actually got my. I'm glad you mentioned. I just jogged my memory with regard to that. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And there's like 6 to 8 shows I think they did, and the shows are like 2.5 hours long. So if you want, and while that might be aversive to some people to contemplate, it's free education essentially, and it's a lot of content and
totally.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, you bet. So let's talk about the processes. So it's kind of funny. Like ACT is really about decreasing rigid rule following, and so that part I briefly mentioned, but not a whole lot. But basically, a lot of these avoidance behaviors that we all engage in are very closely related to rule following with respect to potential aversives, like I shouldn't do this, or I should do that, or I have to do this. And rigid rule following is really, really problematic because life is not always the same, right? Every day is a little bit different. And if we want to change our behavior, kind of by definition, if we want to change our behavior for the better, we need to do things differently from how we always do them every day, right? So ACT is very much about loosening up the rigidity of rule following. And so that's kind of embedded into every aspect of the literature. And so the first and most obvious place for that is they actually came up with a name for the 6 processes that's actually kind of a joke. Like they're making fun of themselves on purpose to model flexibility. And so they call it the hexaflex. And so the hexaflex is supposed to be kind of a goofy name. That was on purpose. But the hexaflex is a collection of 6 what they call processes of ACT therapy that kind of comprise the whole model. So think of it as a package intervention. Like if we want to take our FCT analogy, FCT is a package intervention that consists of extinction for one behavior and functional reinforcement for a different behavior, right? It's a form of DRA. Well, so ACT is the same thing, just a lot more complex. Instead of 2 components, there's 6 components. And each of those 6 components, and because we're dealing with verbally competent humans, each of those 6 components, it is actually made up of a very complex functional analysis of multiple different behaviors and functions. So it's the same idea, just more complex. So basically, each one of those points on the hexaflex corresponds to, and they call them, in the ACT literature, they call them processes of ACT therapy. We don't really like that term too much in behavior analysis because process usually means like reinforcement, right? Or operant conditioning or respondent conditioning. So we don't really think of them as processes from a behavior analytics standpoint. We think of them more as names for complex functional relations, and then names for procedures that are designed to move those complex functional relations in various ways. So let me give another analogy. So extinction as a word is both a name for a functional relation, right? So a behavior that was once reinforced is no longer reinforced. There's a functional relation. But extinction is also a name for procedures that are designed to harness that functional relation to produce meaningful behavior change. So attention extinction is no longer giving attention as a consequence for behavior that was previously reinforced by attention, right? So the word extinction means really 2 different things. It's a process and it's a procedure, or multiple different procedures. Same thing with everything on the hexaflex. So for example, acceptance is a name for a complex functional relation and also a bunch of procedures that have been designed to strengthen that repertoire. So the functional relation, or the sort of the repertoire we're talking about, is in acceptance, is engaging in short-term avoidance and escape less. So weakening short-term avoidance escape behaviors in the presence of aversive stimuli, maybe even just staying put and maybe even potentially moving towards aversive stimuli slightly. For example, if a parent wants to implement extinction for their kid's tangibly maintained tantrum, so the kid's going to scream their head off until they get the candy, what does that do for the parent? It's extremely aversive, right? For any parent. It doesn't matter how good of a behavior analyst you are. I have 3 kids. I've experienced this. It's awful, right?
Oh, yeah, same here.
Okay. So when the kid starts screaming, there's the presence of an aversive stimulus, right? And we know from the parent training that we do that the parent really has 2 choices. Press, 2 levers, if you will. Press the left lever and make the screaming stop. How do you do that? Reinforce the tantrum, right? So the parent has that choice. They can reinforce the tantrum, the screaming goes away. So the parent gets immediate negative reinforcement, immediate escape from that aversive, right? But in the long term, and so that would not be acceptance. But in the long term, then the consequence is that kid's problem behavior maintains, right? So instead, or what acceptance would look like is actually being present with that screaming. So like not moving away from the screaming. And if you want to talk about it as an active repertoire, it's kind of complex, but it might even be orienting one's attention intentionally towards the screaming. So rather than do whatever it takes to not hear the screaming, it might be something like, what does the screaming sound like? Is it high pitched? Is it low pitched? Does it sound like a lion or a banshee? How does the screaming make you feel? Like, let's just notice those emotions. Like, I feel like a bad parent. Like, I'm having the thought I'm a bad parent. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like, how does that thought feel? What does it sound like when you hear that thought? So, in other words, doing anything other than escaping the aversive stimuli and your own private events that the aversive stimuli set the occasion for. So that's the behavioral repertoire, is don't move away from the aversives. So imagine like a scary monster, like just growling and screaming in your face and like drooling on you, right? And instead of run away, you just stand there and just make eye contact with the monster. Like, go ahead, monster, do your best. I'm here. I'm willing. Okay. So think about like a total badass, tough person in a scary situation. What do? They're not running away. They're present. They're there. Okay. So that's kind of an example. Now, in terms of procedures that move that repertoire and that enhance that repertoire, there's dozens, maybe hundreds now of different individual procedures that have been come up with by the ACT community to enhance acceptance. ACT uses a lot of metaphors, and the metaphors can be either purely verbal, so just talking about stuff, or sometimes they're kind of like physicalized and made tangible. So one acceptance metaphor, again, like, okay, you might be talking to a parent and the parent tells you, I can't do extinction. I honestly feel like I'm traumatizing my kid. And, we might say like, oh man, okay, like that's got to hurt a lot, rather than telling the mom, no, you're fine. You're not traumatizing the kid. We might say like, yeah, okay. Oh my goodness. Like I might even apologize. Like, I'm really genuinely sorry that I'm asking you to do something that makes you feel like you might be traumatizing your kid. Like, let's sit with that for a second. And then we might say something like, and these are just examples. So I'm telling your audience, don't just go out and do this. Like you need context and training and supervision and everything. But here's some examples. So you might take a sticky note and say, I wonder if you're willing to like write that down on the sticky note. I might be traumatizing my kid. And then just hold it in your hand and look at it for a while. And sometimes we actually we'll engage in acceptance ourselves. Like, I, as the behavior analyst right now, I feel kind of guilty for making you feel this way. And so I might actually write that on a sticky note and hold that in my hand. Like, I feel kind of bad for making you feel this way. And write that on the sticky note. And now let's both just like sit for a second and like take a deep breath and look at the sticky note. And then how does that feel? Like, what did that look like? Okay. So, and that's just one example. There's hundreds of acceptance exercises, but what that's trying to get at is anything other than just run away from the feeling, anything other than just run away from the thought, anything other than just give in to the tantrum. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. The thing I am curious about is, and this is something I want to get into later, but this is, I think, a good opportunity to bring it up, is that sounds like a therapeutic exchange, if you will. You know, like if you go back to, it might be something that maybe not precisely, but kind of recalls like some of those Carl Rogers videos one probably watched in your undergraduate psych courses and things like that. And so my immediate question with regard to that example, as much sense as that makes, is, okay, well, what is our scope of practice as behavior analysts? And of course, you're talking about verbal behavior. You just made the case that this is all behavior analytic.
It's all behavior, yeah.
But that sounds very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It just sounds like something that you would see in a kind of a counseling session more than what we would normally construe as a behavior analytic endeavor. Can you talk to that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, we can either like talk about that a whole bunch at a different time, or we can kind of intersperse it maybe with each point in the hexaflex.
Yeah,
it's a
let's
really
do that.
important. Sure. Okay. So it's a really, really, really important question. And I think what I would say is, what I always do is go back to Beowulf and Risley and just go down the 7 dimensions. And the number one thing with ACT is we're producing meaningful change in overt behaviors. So if the purpose of what I'm doing as a behavior analyst was to get a person to like be more okay with their feelings, then no, that's not behavior analysis, right? But if by doing that, you see increases in the procedural integrity of parents implementing extinction for a tangibly maintained problem behavior, yeah, that's behavior analysis. Overt behavior change. That's the number one target. If we're not producing that, we're not doing behavior analysis, period.
Got it.
And so that's, and it has to be backed up by a behavior analytic understanding of what the heck's going on here. We're not trying to change their mind or change their feelings or anything else. We're trying to decrease avoidance responding on the part of parents and increase movements toward things they actually care about, which we'll get to on the other points of the hexaflex too. But keep in mind too, so here's a mistake that people really often make with ACT is they're confusing topography with function. So what we're trying to do is change the function of avoidance stimuli. We don't care about specific topographies. So you can make up any other topography you want in terms of the actual exercise, as long as it's moving the functions in the right way. So for example, let's say you have a dad who is from Boston and absolutely hates the Yankees, let's say, okay? And you want to teach, and you're talking to a dad about how I just can't do extinction with my kid because, he should just know better. Like, I shouldn't have to just sit here quietly. Like, I have to, I got to yell at him. I can't, I have to let him know that what he's doing is wrong. And so I might say, okay, I totally get that. And like the normal BCBA response would be, well, you're going to reinforce the problem behavior. And research says you don't want to reinforce problem behavior, right? So you might even say something like that nicely, like, yeah, actually, I get it. And that might actually make the behavior worse, right? But I get that you kind of cannot stand not letting the kid know that what he's doing is wrong and that he needs to be responsible for his behavior. I get it. And I agree with you, actually. And I wonder if it might be worth it to sit with that knowledge that you're not doing what you know you're supposed to do, if it was actually effective in helping decrease your kid's problem behavior. So here, how about we do a silly analogy? You ready for this? And you might take out a Yankees hat and say, like, would you be willing to wear this hat for 30 seconds if it meant that your kid's problem behavior would get better in the future? Like, if it would make you a better dad, would you wear this Yankees hat even though you're a diehard Red Sox fan? Right? And the first reaction of the dad is going to be like, hell no, right? But then like, oh, well, okay, actually, yeah. Like, what would I not be willing to do as a dad for my kid? Nothing, right? Let's just be honest. Pretty much every parent at the end of the day is willing to cut an arm off if they had to for their kid with autism. So you say, so hand him the hat. All right, dude, try it on. Let's see how it fits. Does it feel kind of gross? Does it feel kind of awful wearing a Yankees hat? Yeah, right? Kind of like letting your kid get away with having problem behavior and not yelling at him. Feel a little bit like that? Sucks, right? Totally. I wonder if it's worth it. You want to give it a shot? Let's go get your kid upset. Let's see what happens when you don't pay attention to it and you actually just ignore it. And just imagine the hat. Maybe even wear the hat, right? Maybe even get a different hat. And instead of Yankees, write like being a badass dad on the hat. And like that means I'm willing to sit there and not do what I know I'm supposed to do, but I'm willing to do it because it's going to make a difference for my kid. So something like that, and you don't have to make it all touchy-feely. Everyone's crying. It doesn't have to be all that. It just has to be like functionally, we've got an aversive stimulus and I'm willing to sit with it in order to achieve something else that I really care about.
Is it like is there like a habituation process that
Yes, totally. Right, exactly. And we actually don't focus on that too much, because if we tell the folks that too much, then we actually are kind of orienting them towards escape, right? Like they're willing to sit with the aversive stimulus only because they'll eventually be able to escape it, right? Which would be kind of counterintuitive, right? So we don't focus on the fact that acceptance will produce habituation, but by the way, it does, and it's awesome. And so, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I do this stupid thing whenever I'm in nature. I love being in the woods and in the wild. Whenever I see a body of water, like any time of year, I'll pretty much just jump into it. Like, I love doing it. I have to do it. It's ridiculous, including in the winter, including like frozen lakes, whatever. And so, like, one way to do that is you jump in and you start screaming, you go, ah, and you like run out as fast as you can. Another way to do it is sit down in the water. And I learned this from my friend Chris just this last weekend. We're in Yosemite in like glacier melt streams in the water. And he like sits down in there and he like closes his eyes and breathes as deep as he can and just notices how much it hurts, the ice water all around his body, and just be present with, wow, this really hurts. And you can run out as fast as you can. That's option one. Option two is actually like breathe deep and sit and try to be as calm and quiet and just noticing the pain as you can. So again, it's like, maximize escape versus try not to escape. You're not going to be perfect. You're not a samurai warrior, but maybe you're willing to sit with that aversiveness for a little bit.
Cool. That sounds terrifying, but yeah, if I ever find myself in a body of cold water, I'll keep that in mind. I'm not sure I would go there willingly, but anyway.
Well, and that's what's so cool about this stuff is it's about function, not topography. So it doesn't matter. Like that ice water is always there for all of us. Every day there's something terrifying and difficult because we're verbal humans, right? We always have the ability to move towards something kind of scary and challenge ourselves. We always have the ability to pick up a really confusing, frustrating research article and try our best to read it. We always have the ability to like speak up in class, even though we're shy. We always have the opportunity to give really frank, really honest feedback to staff that we supervise, even though that's kind of difficult and anxiety provoking. Like the ice water is always there, right? Functionally. It's just a matter of like strengthening that repertoire of approaching the ice water rather than running away from it. Or maybe still running away, but like do a little bit of approach first before running away.
Got it. So that's acceptance. All right.
Yeah. Should we keep going?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So that's acceptance. Another bit is present moment. Let's go to that. So the second process we'll talk about is present moment. People talk about it a lot as mindfulness, but basically what it is so again, we'll talk problem behavior versus like replacement behavior that we're trying to strengthen in applied behavior analysis. So problem behavior with present moment is not being in the present. And so the ways that verbally, complex organisms like you and I cannot be in the present moment is by verbally constructing a potential future or verbally reconstructing a past that already happened. So like right now in this moment, I'm looking in this camera on my, the Skype cam, on my webcam, whatever, looking in the thing. Now I'm actually looking at you, your image on Skype. I can be right here, right now, noticing the color of your hair, the fact that you're not balding like I am, whatever, like you're smiling now. It's awesome. And, or I can be like worrying about the next question that you might ask me, thinking about that, trying to prepare for that, right? Or I can be thinking about the last question that I answered, like, oh man, I could have done better. I should have thought of this other thing, right? So like those are two different repertoires of behavior that are somewhat incompatible, right? Like either being fully present with stimuli that are here, right now, or engaging in verbal constructions of potential future stimuli and or past stimuli. So kind of two different repertoires of behavior. Present moment is about strengthening the behavior of paying attention to present moment stimuli and weakening the verbal behavior of responding to past or future stimuli that are no longer present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And so like this is like new stuff to us in behavior analysis, but by the way, like Eastern traditions have known about this for a few thousand years. And that's what like mindfulness meditation is all about, is just training that repertoire. And if you think of it as a mental activity or a mental ability or a brain mechanism or a brain construct, then we're screwed, right? Some people have it, some people don't. People that spend too much time on their iPhone, they don't have it, right? Like Buddhist monks, they have it, right? But in behavior analysis, we're not about that, right? We're about repertoires of behavior and strengthening repertoires of behavior that help people thrive in their everyday lives. So if we talk about present moment awareness or mindfulness as a behavior that can be strengthened, the way that it's usually done is through mindfulness meditation. And so to do that, you basically sit still and pay attention to present moment stimuli. Usually you close your eyes. Usually you take deep breaths and listen to the sound of your breaths. And every time you notice your attention start to wander to something else, like for example, you might think to yourself, this is BS, this is lame. I'm a behavior analyst. I don't need to meditate. Right. Okay, cool. Like thank yourself for that private event, and then bring your attention back to whatever the present moment stimuli are. The sounds in the room, the sound of your heart beating, your breath going in and out. There's all different ways to practice this. That is like discrete trial training with kids with autism. You do a bunch of practice in a contrived setting to strengthen a behavior, but now we got to work on generalization. So to work on generalization of the present moment or sort of mindfulness repertoire behavior, you start doing it all the time, every day, whenever it's convenient at first. So now maybe when you're washing dishes, you might practice noticing what the soap feels like on your hands and the temperature of the water. You might notice if you hear any birds tweeting outside your kitchen window. Every time you start thinking about something else, like this is BS, I hate this is too hard, just thank your mind and then redirect your attention back to whatever's happening right here, right now. Then you might practice it while you're driving rather than worrying about, the next session you're going to do or getting mad about the traffic and everything. Pay attention to the color of the trees that you're driving by. See how many details you can notice in cars that you've never noticed before. Notice the feeling of the, tactilely, the feeling of the upholstery in your car that you've had for 5 years, but maybe there's some little detail you've never noticed before. Like just kind of get present and notice present moment stuff and just practice it a lot every day, whenever you can, whenever it's convenient. That's what it's about. And basically the cool thing about it is it's a repertoire that's always available. It's a repertoire that requires practice, just like anything else, requires lots and lots of practice. But it's always available because we're always here and now, right? We always can be. So that's the second one.
If you want to earn a free Type 2 CE while learning about what precision teaching can do for you and your clients, you're going to want to visit chartlytx.com/Matt. Once there, you'll be able to see a short video that shows how an ABA agency radically improved outcomes for their learners using PT, guided by Chartlytx cloud-based measurement systems. At chartlytx.com/Matt, you'll also find a free, newly revised and expanded ebook called Change Behavior, Change Lives Precisely. Finally, the team at Chartlytx offers intensive workshops on PT at various locations in the United States and Canada. You can find out where these are held at, you guessed it, chartlytx.com/Matt. If you do decide to attend one of these and you want to save a few bucks in the process, you'll find a coupon code there as well. So if you want to realize human potential through individual behavior change analytics, head on over to chartlytx.com/Matt. So I feel like I'm playing spin the wheel or spin the hexaflex, if you will. So sure. What do you want to talk about next?
Okay, so next let's talk about diffusion. And diffusion is basically, again, let's just go problem behavior, alternative behavior. So the problem behavior that diffusion tries to target is rigid rule following. And it's usually, not always, but often rules about oneself. Like I need to do this or I have to do that. Or I'm too, so for social anxiety, I'm too nervous. I can't approach someone today. I'll do it tomorrow. For training parents of kids with autism, you might say to yourself, if you're a behavior analyst, the parent is just too stubborn. They're not going to listen. And so maybe you follow that rule and don't actually engage the parent in training, right? Which then the parent suffers and your client suffers for that. If it's giving feedback to an ABA therapist, right? And your job is to observe and give them feedback. Maybe you say yourself like, well, the person's just lazy, so they're not going to get it. Or that, I told them 5 times, they really should already know how to do it. I shouldn't have to give them more feedback, right? And so maybe you follow that rule and don't give the person feedback, right? And so then their performance suffers and your effectiveness as a behavior analyst suffers, right? So basically, the idea is every day we're walking around, we have the ability to derive rules, right? Talk about behaviors and consequences. And unfortunately, aversive stimuli are especially powerful. So as verbally competent humans, we are especially good at deriving rules about how to avoid those aversive stimuli, right? We're all doing it all day, all the time. And so the problem behavior is like believing those rules. So from a behavior analytic perspective, what does that mean? It means following the rules, behaving with respect to those rules in a repetitive and rigid way. The replacement behavior, the repertoire that we want to strengthen by using diffusion, is basically breaking that repertoire up, is making it less rigid, less repetitive, enhancing one's flexible and fluid and variable rule-following repertoire and rule-deriving repertoire. So for example, like, well, the parent is just too stubborn, they're not going to listen. Well, let's see. Or it's also possible that that's something that I'm noticing, like I'm noticing, or I think that the parent is really stubborn and too stubborn to listen. It's also possible that there's other things going on with the parent, that they're really tired, they're stressed out. Maybe they're, just engaging in other verbal behavior about the parent, in addition to the one old rule that maybe we follow too much and believe too much. Does that make sense? Sure. So just more other flexible rule deriving. And then there's a bunch of exercises that have been designed to target that. And so things like, And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase flexible rule following. But the way that we decrease the rigid rule following is by messing with the function of those rules. And so there's a couple different ways to do it. We can transform the function of problematic rules by making them kind of like silly or humorous or less aversive, or we can transform the function by making them kind of just less effective, kind of more neutral. So I'll give some examples. This one I use all the time. So it's called like thank you mind. So let's say you're about to do something important and your mind tells you something like not helpful, right? So I'm about to get on stage and give a talk, right? And I think, shit, I should have prepared more, right?
Right.
Or I think like, oh man, I'm probably not supposed to swear on this podcast, sorry. But maybe I think like, man, I'm not actually quite ready for this. I didn't, I should have read that one other article, whatever. It's very likely that the things that I'm thinking, and if you want to translate it into behavioralese, the private verbal behavior that I'm engaging in and the private self-rule deriving behavior that I'm engaging in as I walk onto that stage is not helpful. It's basically like useless baggage, right? Like either way, I'm there in that moment and it's time to perform. And those rules, like that verbal behavior, is basically like nonsense. It's like BS. It's like noise on a radio, right? So you can think of it as like your brain or your mind or however you want to talk about your private events as being like kind of like an annoying like jester or like a heckler essentially, right? So when your mind tells you something like that that's not useful, a really great practice is just say thanks in a sarcastic tone. Like, yeah, thanks, mind. That's awesome. Appreciate you having my back. Yeah, it's great. You've been with me for 41 years and you're still really helpful. Thanks, dude. Cool. Right. And you don't, so that's one topography, but it's about function, right? So any other topography you can come up with that will twist that function and transform the function a little bit of your private problematic self-verbal behavior can be useful also. So another one that somebody made up is called crazy FM. So anytime, you're thinking something nuts about yourself, you could just say, yeah, great, awesome. I'm listening to crazy FM again. That's really helpful. Cool. Or whoops, looks like my radio's stuck on crazy FM again.
Right.
Right.
I'm telling myself the I'm no good story again and things
there
like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And so what that does is you might think like, hopefully some of your listeners who are not familiar with this are thinking like, give me a break. Like that's supposed to work. This is BS, right? But good if you're thinking that. And the reason why that's good is because that's kind of the point, is to just mess with it a little, just mess it up a little bit. And so it's not like you're now suddenly going to not have negative thoughts anymore. You absolutely are still going to have just as many negative thoughts as you ever did. But what you're doing is transforming the function. And again, what matters in behavior analysis is function. It's not topography, right? And so if we can make our unhelpful thoughts have a variety of functions instead of the same old aversive function, we're more able to do stuff that matters and make choices that are important, like get up on that stage and give the talk and get it done.
Yeah, it reminds me when I first started learning about ACT a few years ago, I mistakenly signed up for a 100-kilometer mountain bike race.
Awesome.
I wasn't really I'm using race in air quotes as only you can see here on Skype, but my goal was just to finish. And the first half of it went great. I was having a great time, and then probably, once I got towards the back end of it, I started having a really tough time, and
sure.
And it was right as I was listening. I was listening to the Act in Context podcast, learning all that stuff, and reading stuff on the contextual science website and things like that. And I started telling myself, I'm having the thought that I'm going to die, because I started off saying, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, And then I started to like try to put some space between, the statement by saying I'm having the thought, or, oh, look at me, I'm telling myself I'm going to die. This really does suck. But
no, it's a perfect example. It's a perfect example. And I use ACT procedures all the time when I do ridiculous endurance sports, like running way too far on trails and mountain climbing and things like that, and jumping in ice water, just stupid stuff that's extremely aversive. And it helps. And the thing is who cares if you can mountain bike for 60 kilometers or if you can run for 30 miles? What matters is being able to do stuff that's challenging and that moves you towards something you care about, right? So I'm guessing that a 100 kilometer, that's 60-mile mountain bike ride, moved you in the direction of something that you care about, like challenging yourself or having adventure in your life, or stepping into the unknown, or some large verbally constructed, future that matters to you in some way. Same thing for me. And so, that this stuff applies regardless of whether you're doing something physically difficult or just like, showing up to work every day as a behavior analyst. It's pretty damn difficult too, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I also noticed it like at the starting line of it, because like, a lot of times these races, and this one in particular, starts at like some ungodly, like 5:45 a.m. or something like that. It's like, why do I get up at 4 to drive 45 minutes, and
totally.
Stand here with all these other people, all these strangers, and do, and it's just funny, but again, it was right in the time I was learning about all this stuff, and so I found it pretty comical and both comical and helpful.
So let me give you another example of diffusion. This one I love. Carmen Luciano is just a brilliant behavior analyst and amazing ACT and RFT researcher at I think the University of Almeria in Spain, and she's done a few studies now on diffusion, and one of the studies she did was she had participants, I think they were just like Psych 101 students or whatever, do really aversive tasks, and the measure was how long do they do the task for before they quit. And they're tasks that every human is going to quit at some point. No one can last forever, and so the measure is how long do you last before you quit. And the two tasks were a cold presser task, which is just where you put your hand in a bucket of ice water, right? It's how long will you keep it in. And then the other one was, and sorry if this grosses people out, but watching videos, really explicit videos of surgery, like really graphic surgery videos. Awful, right? And so the dependent variable there is how long will the research participants watch really graphic surgery videos before clicking stop or end or whatever. And so what she did was for the diffusion task was first she ran baseline and got a baseline for how long they were willing to do these tasks. And then the diffusion exercise was they told the people, okay, what thoughts are you having when you're just about to give up and stop doing the awful task? And so the subject would tell them, I can't take this anymore, or it's too awful or something like that. Okay, cool. Now, what I want you to do is when you're doing the task and you're about to give up, I want you to close your eyes, imagine a balloon, and take a magic marker and write the thought on the balloon, and then put the balloon to your lips and blow it up and inflate it and watch the balloon slowly float away. And then if you notice that you're still having that thought, which you will, you can't make those thoughts go away, then go ahead and write it on the balloon again, blow it up, watch it float away, and just keep doing that. See if that helps. And then they had a control condition where they told them to do the opposite, like try your hardest not to have those thoughts, basically,
Mm-hmm.
And they saw a real clear difference. Like people were able to do the really aversive tasks longer when they engaged in the diffusion and acceptance exercise than when they just tried their hardest not to feel cold or feel grossed out or whatever.
Awesome. Makes sense. Let's talk about a process that always trips me up. The self as context.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
So you've done a really nice job of translating a lot of these concepts into very, very clear stuff that resonates with, I think, your garden variety BCBA.
Thank you.
And no, I'm serious. And and self as context, I think I'm pretty solid with the others, but that's one that's always given me a little bit of trouble. So can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it took me a while to get solid on this one too. And honestly, for the first few years that I started engaging the ACT work, I kind of just ignored this one because I figured, well, being flexible is part of ACT, right? So I can flexibly apply the model too, right? And of course, the answer to that is yes, of course you can, if you do understand the whole thing, you're probably going to be more effective, just like anything else. But of course you can. And so I ignored it. Well, I didn't ignore it, but I just kind of avoided really engaging it for a while. And now in the last year or two, I'm starting to finally get it. And actually, something that Tom Sabo, the way that he explained it to me was really, really useful. And he just talked about it as, look, it's not some big complicated thing. Like the way it's usually talked about is a transcendent sense of self. A transcendent sense of self. What the hell is that?
Yeah, that's a fast way to lose a behavior analyst in conversation.
Yeah, or any scientist, right? That doesn't sound like science, right? In fact, transcendent actually means like not of this earth or something, right? Like not scientific, right? So I didn't get that. And I tried pretty hard, didn't get it. And then Tom said, look, man, it's not that complicated. All it is flexible perspective taking involving yourself and others and seeing yourself from how other people see you and seeing how other people seeing others from your own perspective, right? Like flexibly back and forth. Sorry, there's a landline ringing in the background.
Don't worry about it.
You can hear that. Okay. And so basically and also seeing yourself as a place in which stuff happens, not as a thing or as a, good or bad or a value judgment. So let me just give a bunch of examples. We'll do a little multiple exemplar training, and then maybe it'll make sense. So, some statements about, and by the way, by perspective taking, all we're talking about, we're not talking about some mental activity or some complex brain process. All we're talking about is verbal behavior directed towards oneself and other people and the relations between those two. Like I'm bigger than you, or I'm older than you, or I'm younger than you, right? That's a piece of the verbal behavior we're talking about. But then the perspective taking that can be problematic is perspective taking, a verbal behavior about oneself that kind of gets in the way of doing stuff that really matters. So, for example, I'm a behavior analyst. That's a really important piece of verbal behavior about oneself, right? I love that. That's one of my favorite things to say. Like, here, try it on. Just say it. I'm a behavior analyst. Say it, Matt. It's awesome.
I'm a behavior analyst.
That's awesm, right? We love it. It's good. Like you're smiling. They can't see it, but you're smiling. Okay, and that's great, right? And that has a lot of really positive functions and useful functions. And if we do it too rigidly and too repetitively and in too constricted of a context, it's actually problematic. So, for example, let's say you make a new friend, at the park, and all you can do is talk about behavior analysis. Not super helpful, right? Like suddenly that really important, awesome self-statement is not awesome. What if the person wants to talk to you about something that's non-behavioral and the only thing you can talk about is behavior analysis because you keep following the rule, I'm a behavior analyst. Oh yeah, well, I'd really like to talk about, religion. Like I happen to be religious. Maybe you're not, but it's really important to me. I'm a behavior analyst. Not the most useful social interaction, right?
Sure.
And so it's an example of how like a statement about oneself as a thing or as a judgment can get in the way if it's followed too rigidly. Even a really good statement, like I'm a behavior analyst. Now, let's take a really bad statement that's almost never helpful, like I'm a bad mother. I'm a bad father. Like I'm a shitty dad. Or I'm someone who makes my kids feel bad. Ouch, right? Like
Yeah.
that, if we rigidly follow a rule like that about oneself, that's definitely going to get in the way. And I guarantee you, if you're a human being and you're sensitive to negative reinforcement, which we all are, you're going to do pretty much whatever it takes to avoid statements that evoke that, avoid situations that evoke that self-statement, right? So when you make your kid cry, that might be much more likely to evoke the statement, I'm being a bad father. Like I'm not good at being a dad. That's aversive, right? So, if it takes reinforcing problem behavior instead of making your kid cry, you might be more likely to do that if it helps avoid aversive self-statements like that. So that's sort of the problem behavior from a self as context perspective, is sort of over rigid or over repetitive statements about oneself. The replacement behavior repertoire that we're trying to strengthen is just more flexible, more values-oriented statements and verbal behavior about oneself and oneself relation to others. So, for example, something like, and this actually relates to what you were talking about in your mountain bike race too, is rather than I'm a bad father, maybe verbal behavior like this might be more useful. I'm a 41-year-old behavior analyst who's supposed to know everything and still kind of feels like I don't know everything and I don't know what to do with my son. Like that, even that is more flexible and more adaptive than I'm a bad father. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
and
totally.
So you can play with it. You can say, I'm a 41-year-old behavior analyst talking on a podcast right now, admitting that he sometimes feels like a bad father. Like I have the thought I'm a bad father sometimes. Even that leaves so much more room for being able to actually then do something like, okay, well, damn it, when I'm done with this, maybe I should go take my kid to the park and throw a ball around, right? Rather than, no, I need to just focus on work, or I just need to have a drink, or I just need to do this, or I just need to do that, right? So it's about just building in more flexible selfing is a kind of a silly way to put it, but it just means more flexible verbal behavior around talking about oneself and one's relation to others.
All right.
Let me give you one more example of that. So when people, when we're doing parent training, parents beat themselves up a lot. And when we are, wait, hang on a sec. I want to make sure I'm not blowing off my next appointment here. Sorry, just checking my calendar super quick. Okay, I'm doing good.
All right, cool.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So,
let me just pause here for a second. This stuff is so deep. We could probably do multiple shows on this. So if we need to put a cap on this at any point, we can come back and do a round two. So I don't want to.
I appreciate that, but I'm having fun. So you're probably going to have to cut me off.
All right, cool.
Cool.
Right.
So when we're doing parent training, like parents will come up with lots of aversive statements about themselves and about the kind of who they are as objects, kind of good guys or bad guys type of stuff, right? And frankly, when we're training behavior analysts, they're going to do that too. Like if a behavior analyst is being honest, behavior analysts are not always confident. We're not always just saying stuff to ourselves that's helpful on the job. In fact, usually when there's problems at work, it comes down to kind of like not helpful statements about oneself and others. Like I really care about my job, but she just doesn't give a crap. Or I'm working really hard and she's just not carrying her load, right? Like rigid statements about oneself versus others. And so self as context exercises involve things like this, like here's one. And, and again, it's not the topography that matters, it's the function. So you can play with these and you can adjust them to be like more emotionally evocative or less, depending on what's appropriate for the context. But here's one example. It's like, think about someone, like take a second, close your eyes if you want to. Think about someone who you really look up to a lot, like a hero of yours in behavior analysis. So this is something like I could do with one of my grad students if they're having a tough time, or I could do with a BCBA that I'm supervising. So like, all right, so just do it. Like maybe take 30 seconds and really think for a while and pick someone who, generally speaking, you really have a lot of respect for and look up to, and maybe would even want to impress them. All right. So imagine that person. Mm-hmm. Now take a look at yourself. And look at yourself. Like, what am I doing? I'm sitting in a chair. Okay, yep. I'm wearing jeans and a button up. Okay. Now imagine that person, your hero, is sitting about 12 feet away from you, and they're looking at you. See if you could sit inside their skin and look out through their eyes at you. What do you look like? And think about what that person would say. And probably what the person is going to say is, well, gee, I guess I look like, that person meaning me, and this gets very like meta, right? Talking from different perspectives. But maybe my hero would look at me and say something like, gee, he actually looks like he's a behavior analyst who's kind of trying pretty hard and having a tough time. All right, cool. How does that look? That looks a little different, huh? From what you're saying about yourself right now, which is like, I'm not good enough. I can't take it or whatever. Or I think I might have to quit, or I might have to whatever, right? Whatever the negative private events are. Okay, cool. Now, let's fast forward like, 10 years into your future career. And let's say you got through grad school, you got your BCBA, you really gave it your all, and you made a difference for some clients. And you're 10 years older now. Now, let's say you're like 30-year-old you or 40-year-old you. And let's say you had like a magical telescope that you could look back through the past and see yourself sitting right here, right now, saying these things about yourself. Like, what do you think? How would that sound to you back then, And maybe the person would say, well, I guess I'd have more perspective. Maybe I'd see like probably things are going to be okay. Like, yeah, okay. Like, keep your eye on the ball. Like, think about the big picture, something bigger, broader than just like, I'm stressed out right now. Okay, cool. Now, let's say that, that person was going to write you a letter and stick it in a time capsule for you to open 10 years from now. What would it say, right? And so you could see how you can play with all of this. And basically the idea is you're helping the person go back and forth in terms of perspective taking. So take your own perspective, now take someone else's perspective of how they see you. Now take their perspective of how they think you see them. Like, what would you be saying to them if you had, right? And so basically the idea is just flexible, just variety in thinking about and talking about yourself versus others. Just that is better than and more adaptive than saying the same old not useful aversive statements about oneself.
Got it. Cool. Thanks for taking the time to kind of plow through that.
Actually, let me give you one more. So a friend of mine, I love this guy, John O'Neill. He got his PhD from Southern Illinois University. A few years ago now. He does really cool research on use of force in police training, actually, which is a really neat area for behavior analysts to be involved in. But so I had an email exchange with him the other day, and I forget even what it was about. But I was feeling so stressed out, and I like opened my email inbox and saw all the stuff I had to do, and I honestly like felt like crying. I was just like, dude, I can't take this right now. I took on too much. This is unreasonable, And so I'm replying to an email that he sent, and he said like, hey, how's it going or something, right? And I replied saying, dude, I feel like a chicken with my head cut off. Like, this is just insane, And so there's a self-statement. I'm a chicken with my head cut off, right? And it implies like all really like aversive, negative stuff that for sure I would want to escape from, right? And his reply was so awesome. He replied saying, a badass 3-headed research chicken, like spitting like, data flames out of each one of its heads.
That's funny.
Yeah, right. And obviously he's just trying to cheer me up. And I don't even know if he was trying to do a self as context thing at all, but it was totally a diffusion thing and totally a self as context thing, because what it did was look at myself in a little bit different way. Like, yes, I feel stressed out. Yes, I kind of can't do this. I'm late on a lot of stuff. I overcommitted. And it's kind of awesome. Like, I'm achieving a whole bunch of really stuff that I really care about at the same time. And so now I've actually like used it. I don't think I've even told him this. I don't think he even knows, but I use this on a daily basis now. When I'm feeling too stressed out, I kind of make like a physical pose with my hands up, like they're chicken heads, not when people are watching, obviously, but like, privately. And I'm like, yeah, wow, and I imagine like flames squirting out of like a cartoon chicken head. And doing that is more effective and more adaptive than saying words like, I can't do this. I'm overcommitted. I got to say no to stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's funny as hell too.
Better. Yeah, right? And it's funny and it's fun. Why not?
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get CEs.
If you want to get rid of it, you can drink to the point of passing out, or you can like overdose on drugs, or you can just be asleep. Like those are your choices, right? But if you're not going to do that bad stuff, then you're going to be doing this, generating unhelpful, aversive verbal behavior. That's just what we do as humans. So that's what we're doing all the time. What is a lot cooler way to live is to also generate verbal behavior about long-term positive reinforcers that are big classes of positive reinforcers that are largely verbally constructed. And so let me give you some examples. So like being an awesome dad is one of mine. And so anything that connects with being an awesome dad verbally, and you can do a complex analysis in terms of relational frame theory and stimulus equivalence. The analysis is there. We don't have time for it now, nor do I think it's necessary. I think people can kind of get at the gut level that when I say something like, gee, should I stay late at work right now? Or should I maybe like kick off work an hour early and go pick up my kids and take them to the park? Well, let's see. What do I really care about right now in my life? Like, yeah, career is super important. Like being successful in my career, that's one of my values. Awesome dad, bigger value. Like it just is. It just is, you know. Going to the park with my kids, is that like, what does that connect with? Duh, right?
Sure.
It's like, doesn't take a lot of thought. It's pretty simple. And so living a valued life and connecting with your values is just about that. It's about engaging in verbal behavior, about the stuff, the positive reinforcers, the long-term positive reinforcers that we really genuinely care about, and using our own verbal behavior to orient our action towards those. And the point of that is to sort of strengthen that repertoire of moving towards positive reinforcers and weaken the repertoire of avoiding aversives. And it's not like we're going to stop engaging in avoidance. That's part of being a human too. It'll never go away. But life is better if we spend less time avoiding and more time approaching. And again, just back to this example, the parents implementing extinction with their kid who's screaming is engaging in avoidance would be reinforce the tantrum, right? But sitting with the screaming and accepting the screaming and implementing extinction with procedural integrity is really hard, but it's less hard if it's in the interest of some longer term value that the parent genuinely cares about. So while they're hearing the kid scream, it's useful for the parent to say something like making friends, living independently, having a better life. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like
totally.
In that moment, like, I'm going to hear you scream. Like, they don't have to say it to the kid out loud, but they can think it to themselves. I'm going to hear you scream so I can help you make friends in the future. I'm going to hear you scream so that you can maybe live one day on your own. Like, I'm going to let you scream so that you can get the most out of life. Like, those are all. No, go ahead. Sorry.
And the committed action is what you're saying is following the plan, essentially.
Exactly.
Whatever the plan happens to be.
Exactly right. Yeah. And so values is important, and contacting values makes life meaningful. But if you're not doing committed action towards your values, then all the rest of ACT, honestly, can be thrown in the trash. Like, the committed action is what makes it behavior analysis, and what makes it socially meaningful is that we're doing overt behaviors that make life better, and they're overt behaviors in the direction of those values. So if it's parent training, we're getting parents to implement extinction more consistently. We're getting parents to spend more time playing with their kids. We're getting parents to put down the phone and make eye contact with their kid and try to have fun, even if it's hard and it's not easy to have fun. Even if their kid's repetitive behavior stresses them out and makes them upset and worry about the future, put down the phone, turn off the TV, whatever it takes, be present, do those committed actions. And they have awesome outcomes like that. Like, consistently in the research, people say, well, and this is kind of a no duh, right? But consistently in the research, people say when they do stuff they really care about, their life gets better, right? Spend more time doing stuff you really care about. And so that's how the two pieces connect. And there's, a bunch of like specific procedures. So like values procedures are things like, think about things you really care about. Take some time writing about it. That's a real simple exercise. Another one is write your own retirement speech. Like, what would you want your best friend saying at your retirement party about you 50 years from now? Write your own eulogy, right? Like, what would you want your son or daughter to say at your funeral about you? That keys into what you really, really care about. And then committed actions are all you have to do is say what you're going to do, and you got to commit to somebody, right? So you could text somebody, you could post it on Facebook, you could make a plan with your supervisor, writing down. It should sound a lot like goal setting, right? It basically is. So committed actions are setting behavioral goals, overt behaviors, moving in the direction towards your values. Values themselves are larger and broader and are not goals. Like being an awesome dad is my value. That's not a goal. I'm never going to be done with being an awesome dad until I'm dead, right?
For sure.
But my committed action this week could be, I'm not going to say yes to the next speech invitation that's emailed to me. I'm not doing it. I'm staying home. I'm not going to get on the plane. I'm going to be home with my kids. There's a specific committed action that I can follow through with.
Got it. Well, this is a perfect segue because what I want to talk about is some of the research that you've done with parents. And I think you've got a recent paper in the Journal of Contextual Behavioral Science. So can you walk us through that? Because I think that'll be really actionable for a lot of folks listening to this show right now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm glad you asked about that paper. So that was a good friend, and I would almost say more like co-mentor and colleague of mine, Evelyn Gould. I was technically her dissertation chair for that. That's her dissertation research. But like honestly, she's taught me more about ACT than I've taught her. She's incredible. She's actually right around the corner from you too. She's at McLean Hospital, which is part of Harvard in Boston.
Okay.
And so she's there, and she's a behavior analyst, dyed-in-the-wool behavior analyst, PhD in behavior analysis, and has worked in autism her whole career, and now is actually working on an inpatient facility for adolescents with severe OCD and anxiety. And she's sort of like the staff behavior analyst, and the rest of the folks there are clinical psychologists and ACT folks. And so they're learning about behavior analysis from her. She's learning about ACT from them, and it's really, really cool work that she's doing. But this is her dissertation done in the context of families at First Steps for Kids mostly, which is a clinic that she worked at the time in Los Angeles, and for which I'm the research director right now. And it was a 6-session protocol where over the course of 6 weekly sessions, one-on-one training, she basically went over the 6 pieces of the hexaflex with parents and gave them a bunch of specific exercises and customized those exercises to their daily lives with their kids, and identified values-directed overt behaviors that the parents said they wanted to engage in. She didn't tell them what to do. And she had the parents track those behaviors. And we did a multiple baseline across parents. And what we saw real consistently across all 3 parents was the parents started engaging in a lot more of these overt behaviors. A lot of the parents were doing 0 in baseline. They started engaging in a lot of them. And the 2 parents that were able to actually get follow-up data on, I think it was like 7 months or 8 months post us interacting with them at all, they're actually doing more of these committed actions than they were during the treatment phase or post-treatment phase itself. So we saw really nice maintenance and generalization that was stronger than the initial treatment effect to begin with.
So I would suggest they're contacting more natural reinforcers if that's continuing to move on in the way you described.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the cool thing about, like, we already know from like Stokes and Bear and from the early days of ABA that we're not just about increasing or decreasing small, concrete overt behaviors that we think matter, right? We're about empowering people to develop repertoires that they can carry forward into their daily lives and that will be useful and actually contact everyday reinforcers in their daily lives, right? And that's true whether we're talking about working with kids with autism, training parents, or frankly, training our staff that we work with, right? And so when you think about just like a mindfulness repertoire, like for example, when you're having a social interaction, try to be present with the social interaction. Like try your hardest to really hear what the person's saying. And then when you're talking to them, like make eye contact and really be present with them when you're talking. That repertoire, if you strengthen that repertoire, results in reinforcement. You get more smiles, you get more eye contact, you get a more meaningful social interaction, right? And it's the same thing with kids. When we train parents to be more present when they're playing with their kids, the kids smile more, the kids have more fun, the parents have more fun. And so just the natural consequence of being in the present moment when you do stuff is more reinforcing. So that stuff and all these other repertoires too, like taking your mind less seriously, the diffusion stuff, right? That is transportable to anywhere, whether you're on the starting line of a mountain bike race and you go, oh, great, thanks a lot, negative Nelly radio station, or whether you're just taking out the trash and you're sick and you're tired and you don't want to go shovel snow because you live in New Hampshire, whatever it is, right?
It's snowing right now, as a matter of fact. It's April 6th when we're recording this. We're going to get about 4 inches of snow tonight. So.
There you go. So those repertoires, Skinner talked about them as sort of like self-management or self-monitoring repertoires, these secondary repertoires of behavior that we learn and that get strengthened because they're useful in our daily lives. That's what ACT is about, is strengthening those other repertoires. And they go with you wherever you go.
Awesome. And I just want to give a shout out to Rianne and Cheyenne, because they wrote in asking about that topic specifically. A couple other, a general question that was inspired by some listener questions sent in. Hang on.
Sure. I just want to say one thing about Evelyn's study. If you email her, she will just email you the script, like literally how to run it with the parents. So awesome. That's a really good idea. Do that.
All right. I'll see if we'll talk offline and we'll get hooked up and maybe we can figure out how to share it broadly with
that'd be cool.
So we don't blow up her email. But yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to check that out. So, all right. So Celia and Heather asked questions that were pretty similar, about using ACT with directly with the kiddos. We've been talking a lot about parents as it relates to language capability. What would you say from your experience is the kind of prerequisite or requisite skill level with a learner in order to start using or incorporating some of these techniques?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love this question, and it's one that comes up a lot. And I will say, just full disclosure, like doing ACT procedures and stuff with kids is not really my main area of expertise. I've more done like staff and parents and my own students and things like that. But so folks like Mark Dixon at SIU has done a bunch of this work, and he's published a couple books now. One is a few years old, and another one literally just came out. It's called AIM, AIM, and it's something about applied behavior analysis, ACT, and mindfulness for folks on the spectrum. So he has a couple books that are really useful on this. But I would say, there you go. You've got one of them. You've got the 180-day treatment protocol, and then that's the older one, and then the AIM one just came out, so you got to get that too.
Yep. We actually did shows on both of those. So
perfect. So readers should check out that, or listeners should check out those episodes. And then also, though, I will say, here's one thing to start thinking about right off the bat, is that ACT is about flexibility, and especially flexibility in verbal behavior. And so right now, like literally in your very next ABA session that you do with a kiddo, start self-monitoring your own verbal behavior and see if there's a way you could make it a little more flexible. Right? Like even down to the simplest things like how we present an SD during discrete trial instruction. If it will still work just fine to present the SD slightly differently from trial 1 to trial 2, do it, right? Just talking a little bit differently and more flexibly and more with more variability in our daily interactions with these kids will start to produce that flexibility in verbal behavior and rule deriving that we want. That's the basis of ACT. Break the rules sometimes in front of the kid on purpose and in a way that's fun. So like, let's say there's some contingency that's real serious. The kid has to do X, Y, and Z in order to get some big reinforcer. Every now and then, like literally hold up the token board in front of the kid and just tear it in half and give him the reinforcer for free. As long as he's not having a tantrum in that moment, right? Like, literally, like, wear your hat backwards, like turn your shirt inside out, just do silly, fun stuff that's flexible and not rigid. That's the basis. And really, when you think about it, that's like a physical metaphor that kind of shows all of this stuff. Say things the wrong way, make up silly words like today's backwards day. So, I really hate chocolate chip cookies. I don't want any. And then you eat one, right? How about you? Do you hate them too? Yeah, I hate them. Okay, here you go. Eat one, right? So make it fun and just make verbal behavior a context, make talking a context for like fun and flexibility and positive reinforcement. And what that does is that models verbal stimuli being flexible and having multiple possible functions, not having the same old rote, repetitive, rigid, aversive functions.
I love that. Make talking a context for fun. That is
right. Why not?
That's the pull quote for the podcast. I think right there.
Cool.
All right. So I think a lot of people listening to this and we're like, okay, I mean, there's probably, there's going to be some skeptics, of course, as there is whenever you talk about ACT and RFT. But for the folks who are kind of responding to this and saying, hell yeah, what would you suggest as good ways to kind of learn about this? Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, we want to have some training and supervision. What are some recommendations that you have as it relates to getting that education? There's probably a couple different routes, I would imagine. But let's take it from the standpoint of someone's they're through their grad program, they've got their BCBA, they're already practicing. Going to UNR or SIU for their doctorate is not not
an option.
Not an option, or at least not an option right now. So.
Yeah. So first of all, we need a book on ACT that's written for behavior analysts. There's, 100 or more books on ACT, but most of them are written for the general public and for clinical psychology. I've been given the opportunity to write that book, and honestly, that's one of my committed actions is to say no to that. I'm not going to do it. Like, I need to have more time for my family, so I'm not writing that book. But some other very smart people are, so that book's going to be out in the next year or two. I'm not going to give any more information on it than that, and that would be nice to have. It would be helpful. But in the meantime, for sure, check out Mark Dixon's books. Those are specifically designed for behavior analysts to be able to implement, and they're pretty straightforward. So definitely get those, and they're pretty affordable. They're reasonably priced. Another great way to do to learn more about ACT, if you're going to be brave, if you want to make an acceptance move, is to read a couple of the self-help books that are not written for behavior analysts. So Russ Harris's The Reality Slap.
Oh, that's awesome.
And awesome, right? And the Happiness Trap are both great. Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by, is it Hayes? Yeah, I think it is Steve. Yeah. All right, so all three of those are self-help books written for just Joe Schmo, anybody, not behavior analysts. And so you're going to have to do a lot of translating, and you're going to have to do a lot of acceptance work where you just kind of sit with the sort of aversiveness that you might experience when you read a bunch of touchy-feely, fluffy nonsense. And you say, how the hell is this behavior analysis? Well, listen to this podcast, right? And now you actually kind of know, if you at least some of it. But do those books. So do those self-help books on yourself. And the thing is, you actually have to do them if you want to learn from them. You can't just read them. When it says, here's an activity, do it, you got to do it, right? So if it says, close your eyes and imagine ... you have to actually put the book down, close your eyes and imagine it, and actually work through the exercises. And you'll learn a lot. And the thing is, remember, it's about function. It's not about topography. So if you notice the functions start to move and start to work with your own behavior, well, guess what? You're an organism doing operant behavior. That works the same way as your client doing operant behavior. That works the same way as his or her parent doing operant behavior, right? That's the cool thing about our science, is it's applicable to everybody. So when you practice it on your own behavior, that actually gives you great training to now figure out how to apply it to the folks you work with. Now, the third thing, and probably the most important thing you can do, is attend a workshop. And so Praxis offers a bunch of workshops. I'm one of their trainers. There's multiple trainers now doing ACT workshops for behavior analysts. And I do recommend going to one for behavior analysts. The other ones are great too, but again, you're going to have to do a lot of translating, and they don't give you as much practical information on exactly what to do in your practice as an ABA person. So go to one of these ACT workshops for behavior analysts. There's 2-day workshops happening right now by Adele Nadowski and Tom Sabo. Those are fantastic. There's 1-day workshops that are great. If you can make it to a boot camp, without sounding like overly dramatic or whatever, but like it actually kind of does change your life. It's just that, it's like 4 days, all day. It makes a big difference. It connects you with everything that's the coolest about being a behavior analyst and gives you a whole bunch of new tools and techniques to do ACT within your practice. And then you can also check out the ACBS conference, the Association for Contextual Behavior Science. It's a huge conference, several thousand people once a year, and they have lots of great workshops and lots of great presentations on ACT. But the main thing is don't be afraid to just try something little in the context of what you already do as a behavior analyst. So pick something that you already do and you do well, and pick one teeny little thing from some point on the hexaflex and just try to tweak it a little bit in the context of what you already do. So a real simple thing, like when we're talking to parents, we're doing parent training, every single thing that you ask a parent to do, add at the end of the sentence, in the service of X. And X is something that the parent has identified they really care about. And it can't be something you tell them to care about. It has to be their values. So if they really want their kid to be more independent in the future, every single thing you ask the parent to do, comma, because eventually it actually will help get us closer to your kid being more independent in the future. So there's a little values thing that you could do that's like, is that in your scope of practice? Yeah, right? Like you probably do that already pretty much, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just a reminder to do it more often and to do it all the time. Same thing with, when you hear yourself making statements to your staff that you're supervising, if they're like really rigid or concrete statements about who you are or about who they are, play with those a little bit, mix them up a little bit, make them more flexible, So you have to do X instead of that. Maybe something like, well, might be a good idea to try X. Or we all have to do, fill out the timesheets this particular way because that's what the insurance company says. You could link it back to values like, man, we got to make sure these kids get all their funding, and we can't get the funding unless we fill out the insurance paperwork correctly, right? Like, yeah, it sucks, it's boring, and it's probably worth it in the service of kids getting their full dosage of treatment. There's a values bit, snuck into one of the most aversive things, paperwork, right?
There you go.
And self-disclosure, like, don't be afraid to just like be a little bit honest about your own private events that are not perfect. No one thinks that the leader is supposed to be like, a robot and have no negative private events. Like, we're all human beings. And what I've found is when leaders share a little bit of their own vulnerability, it actually makes people think they're stronger, not weaker, and people will follow you more if you're willing to show that you're also not perfect. You don't want to dump your imperfections all over the people that you're leading, obviously, but like a little bit here and there that just shows that, yeah, I'm a human too. Like, this is hard. That's an acceptance move. You're modeling acceptance, that it's okay to not be perfect. What matters is doing what you really care about.
Very cool. Well, Jonathan, those are very wise words. I've kept you about a half hour over what I promised, so I think it's probably time to wrap this up. Do you have any final words of advice? Any final thoughts for particularly for a newly minted BCBA, folks who are interested in this, people getting started in their careers, etc.
Yeah, and it's kind of be a repetition of what we've already said. But what I would say is, man, life is about so much more than avoiding what sucks. Like, look out for that. Those are red flags. Like, look out for where your behaviors on a daily basis are avoidance, and just open up a little bit, like loosen up a little bit, be more vulnerable, and look for opportunities to move towards things that are awesome that maybe you thought like are out of your reach. Maybe a new area of application in your practice that you didn't really think was your business to do, but maybe you can reach out there tentatively, slowly, carefully, and with proper supervision. Reach out, make connections. Like, I think just being more vulnerable and more open and more willing to take risks, obviously only when it's, ethically justified and safe to do so. But just getting out there and moving towards like envisioning things that are awesome and positively reinforcing and big and cool and big picture, which really is just another way of saying values, right? Like, that makes your life more awesome as a behavior analyst, and it will inspire other people. And you're never too young to start doing it. This could be your first year out of grad school. You just got your BCBA certification. Right now is an opportunity to do something awesome that you maybe think you're too young for. Just give it a shot. It's worth it. And honestly, that's how people change the world, is just one cool little step and one piece of willingness and one piece of acceptance, one piece of committed action at a time.
Awesome. All right, Jonathan Tarbox, thank you so much for joining us today. This has just been fantastic. So appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
No problem. There'll be tons of questions coming from this, so we'll have to get you back for another round and maybe take a deeper dive into some of these things that we went over for the purposes of brevity. So thanks again.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot.
All right, folks. I really hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Wow, did we cover a lot of terrain there. Hats off to Jonathan for making such a lucid explanation of all the ACT processes. And if you want more information, you're going to want to go to behavioralobservations.com and just click on the show notes for session 50. I have a gazillion links to all sorts of things that we talked about in today's episode, and you'll find everything you need there. And if I forgot anything, just Reach out to me on social media. One of the things that I've been doing a lot of recently is connecting with people on Instagram. I am at Behavioral Observations, so you can follow me and send me a direct message, or certainly reach out in any other way on any other social media channel, or certainly at matt@behavioralobservations.com. So until session 51, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Cicoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.